Putin invites Xi to Moscow and a concerning friendship deepens. China intercepts U.S. aircraft in the South China Sea. U.S. says the intercept could have caused a collision. COVID in China so far. Coming up on today's episode of China Explained. In a very concerning move, Putin invited Xi to Moscow during a video conference, saying that the ties between the two countries are the best they have ever been. He also expressed his wish to increase military cooperation. During the same video conference, Putin stated that in the face of unprecedented pressure and provocation from the West, both countries have to stick together, while conveniently missing to mention the conflict in Ukraine, in which the Kremlin was the instigator. Putin told Xi in an 8-minute introductory statement broadcast on state television, "We are expecting you, dear chairman, dear friend. We are expecting you next spring on a state visit to Moscow." Xi responded by saying that China is ready to increase strategic cooperation with Russia and be a global partner for the benefit of the people of both countries and in the interest of stability around the world. This is very rich coming from China, as both countries have a dismal record of human rights, and in the ongoing war against Ukraine, Russia has committed countless war crimes. So peace and stability is the last thing on either Xi or Putin's mind. If you have been living under a rock and are not aware of the atrocities committed by China and Russia, let us educate you. And if you are aware of their antics, let me refresh your memory. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission and other human rights organizations, the invasion of Ukraine has been carried out through indiscriminate attacks on civilians. The Kremlin has specifically targeted homes, hospitals, schools, and kindergartens. Russian forces has shown a blatant disregard for civilian lives by using ballistic missiles and other explosive weapons with broad area effects in densely populated areas. In addition, Russia has falsely claimed to have only used precision-guided weapons. Reports on the usage of cluster munitions have also raised concerns about the civilian lives lost and the risk of unexploded ordnance. Since October 2022, Russia has increased the intensity of attacks on power stations and other civilian infrastructure in a campaign intended to demoralize the Ukrainian people and threaten to leave millions of civilians without heating or water during the harsh winter experienced by the country. If all this is not inhumane and a complete violation of the Geneva Convention, Russian soldiers have resorted to torturing and mass execution of civilians. Human Rights Watch cited reports that in Stayi by Kyiv, Russian forces rounded up at least 6 men and executed them on February 27th. The villagers' bodies were allowed to be buried on March 7th. The soldiers left on the 31st of March. The Guardian said that 3 or 4 additional executions had taken place and that the local school had been destroyed. Much of the property in Stayi by Kyiv and Novyi by Kyiv was damaged or destroyed. But this is not even the worst of their actions. They have planted mines in the cities that were being inhabited, shot through windows of residences in an attempt to kill civilians, and killed people on the highways trying to escape the Russian troops by setting fire to their cars and shooting them in the middle of the highway and setting fire to their bodies to erase all evidence. And the saddest part is, this doesn't even scratch the surface of the atrocities committed by Putin and his goons, that is, the Russian military. And if you think China is better than this, you need clarification. So here are some of the human rights abuses China partakes in. The 1982 Constitution guarantees freedom of speech. The Chinese government often uses the subversion of state power and protection of state secrets clauses in their law system to imprison those who criticize the government. Another crime used to jail critics such as Sun Dao is picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Another example is Ren Zhijiang. On the 24th of July 2020, the CCP expelled an outspoken and influential property tycoon, Ren Zhijiang, who denounced the country's authoritarian leader, CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping. He went missing in March after criticizing Xi, and later his case was passed to the judiciary system for criminal investigation. On the 29th of July 2020, the Chinese government began applying the new national security law to suppress peaceful speech, curtail academic freedom, and generate a chilling effect on the fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong. But all of this pales to what the CCP is going to do to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. There are reports of systematic torture, illegal imprisonment, forced labor, organ harvesting, and abusive psychiatric measures. And who can forget the Tiananmen Square massacre? Except for the CCP. As with Russia, What has been mentioned in terms of human rights abuses does not even begin to scratch the surface, and is so plentiful we would need a separate video even to begin to elaborate and mention all the atrocities committed against the citizens of their own countries. So if you're interested, comment down below and we will make a full video on all the human rights abuses of China. So I guess now you understand why I call the friendship between these two world leaders disconcerting. The two countries have enjoyed close relations militarily, economically, and politically, while supporting each other on various global issues. Commentators have debated whether the bilateral strategic partnership constitutes an alliance. Russia and China officially declared their relations not allies, but better than allies. Suppose the relationship between Russia and China is left unchecked. They together will put an end to the world as we know it, and I assure you that peace and stability will not be the outcome like both countries suggest. Talking about disturbance of the peace, a Chinese fighter jet flew within 6 meters or 10 feet of a United States Air Force surveillance jet over the hotly contested South China Sea. The US said that the aircraft was flying lawfully while conducting a routine operation in international airspace. And for all of you who are wondering what this routine exercise was, it is a surveillance mission that the US does to ensure the trade routes in international airspace are clear and no country, China, is unlawfully interfering in these routes or the Indo-Pacific in general. But China claims the entire South China Sea as its territory, saying that the proof of its claims lies in a 200-year-old map that shows a 9-dash line denoting the entire South China Sea as its territory, which is downright moronic. That is like the UK saying it rules over the entire Earth because an outdated map said so. Do you see the logical fallacy in this argument? To no one's surprise, Xi doesn't, because all he sees is the vast expanses of oil and natural gas trapped underneath the Earth's surface. Anyways, the footage shows the Chinese jet fighter flying within several meters of the nose of the much larger surveillance plane, a maneuver that the US said had forced its pilot to take evasive measures to avoid a collision. But this is not the first time the Chinese Air Force did something so reckless. In June, multiple sources in the Canadian Forces and the federal government confirmed that Chinese jets are repeatedly buzzing, a Canadian surveillance plane that is part of a United Nations mission over international waters. Those jets were repeatedly seen flying as close as 20 to 100 meters, which is 65 to 330 feet for all our American viewers. Anyone who has a passing interest in aviation knows that it is extremely close and could result in a disaster. Australia also alleged a Chinese fighter jet dangerously intercepted an Australian military surveillance plane in May. The alleged encounters occurred on April 26th and May 26th. A U.S. military spokesperson told the New York Times that there has been an alarming increase in the number of unsafe and unlawful aerial intercepts, and the number of confrontations at sea by the People's Liberation Army soldiers has also drastically increased. He went on to add that this latest incident reflects a concerning trend of unsafe and dangerous intercept practices by the PLA that is of grave concern to the United States. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command said in a separate statement that they will continue to oppose any military pressure or coercion against our allies and partners in the region. A day after the unlawful aerial encounter, U.S. officials say that they are closely monitoring China's military activities in the region. Despite having no legal right over the South China Sea, China is constantly encroaching on other countries' waters and airspace. They are also actively engaged in constructing artificial islands in international waters. In my humble opinion, the more the countries allow the CCP to get away with the blatant disregard for international waters and airspaces, the more the CCP will become emboldened and the more of these unlawful actions will take place. The best way to stop these actions is to sanction China and to stop sugarcoating these actions and call them for what they are: acts of war. In other news, China reported one new COVID death in the entirety of mainland China, saying that the death toll had risen to 5,248. But if you've been watching our videos for some time, you'll know that it's a blatant lie. But for everyone not in the know, China is struggling with the virus, bodies are piling in morgues and funeral homes, and there are no ICU beds left for the sick, and people are having to share beds. But China refuses to share information about the number of infected people and deaths because they are afraid of losing face. But the futile effort to save face has resulted in China lying to other countries, for whom the data is extremely important to contain and combat the virus. The lying goes so far as to suggest tourists lie on their international travel forms and say they are not affected by the virus when they are. I honestly think this kind of careless behavior led to COVID being a huge problem, because if China admitted that there is a virus that they most likely created and is extremely contagious, and not silenced the whistleblowers, the world will not be in this state. But alas, they chose not to share the information, resulting in the world suffering one of the worst healthcare calamities in modern times, just to inflate the ego of the party members and their narcissistic, egomaniacal dictator Xi Jinping. And they refuse to accept any responsibility and continue to indulge in the same behaviors that cause every person in the world enormous amounts of suffering. The worst part is that wolf warriors like Hua Chunying are calling out countries like the US for their COVID deaths, while refusing to release the data themselves and going so far as to change the definition of COVID death. Don't forget the Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Director General, Information Department, MFA PRC, Hua Chunying's tweet that showed Chinese people celebrating by burning firecrackers, while Indians were burning bodies, when she thought that China recovered while the rest of the world's suffering from the virus of their creation. And this is a sentiment largely shared by the Chinese populace. But can you imagine a dignitary and the spokesperson no less acting in such an undignified way? But I digress. Countries are hesitant in letting in Chinese tourists and are imposing travel restrictions. Japan has stated that people coming from China or who visited China in the past 7 days will be tested, and flights from China will be restricted. Indian authorities implemented similar guidelines for travelers not only from China, but also from several nearby locations, including Japan, South Korea, and Thailand. Taiwan also announced mandatory tests on arrival for travelers coming from mainland China. In Europe, both Spain and Italy tightened their restrictions. Spain now requires a negative test for COVID-19 or proof of full vaccination for visitors arriving from China, while Italy has brought back mandatory testing. The UK has said it is considering whether to introduce new rules. This is a step in the right direction because, as we saw, neither the CCP nor the Chinese people care about your well-being, although blaming the citizens of China would be wrong, as they have been completely brainwashed by their government with soft power and propaganda. Well, that's all for today. If you liked the video and want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe, and ring the notifications while you're at it to stay updated on news about China. If you enjoyed the video, please press the like button and share the video, as it helps with the algorithm. And if you have any inputs or criticisms, let us know in the comment section below. Until next time, thank you for watching, and goodbye.